So, welcome to today's podcast. Really grateful for our listeners out there. This is where we're trying to bring education and empowerment to clients so they can take over their financial lives. And I'm just so anxious to kind of get this going. I have a special guest, Alessandra Long, who's a friend of mine locally, a state attorney. And this is one of those topics. And the day we're recording this, we're talking is tax day, which is ironic because when you go back, I think about it in my days of Ben Franklin quotes. He said, "There's only in this world, there's nothing could be said to be certain except for death and taxes." So we're not about talk about taxes today, but the unfortunate reality is whether we want to or not, we unfortunately will leave this earth. Maybe Alessandra, you can help me figure out a way to get around that. But as far as I know, we all end up unfortunately graduating from this earth. And so this is where we have to plan ahead for the benefit of our families, right? Those that we care about, right? Things that we do care about, charities, things of that nature. So that's why to me, estate planning is so important to get ahead of things because that's the last thing we want to do is to leave any mess for the people that unfortunately have to deal with with the loss of a loved one. And so how do we get ahead of that? So Alessandra, I really appreciate you coming on with me today and sharing your wisdom with my audience.
Well, I really appreciate you having me. And yeah, what a coincidence that we have planned to do this on tax day. And as I'm very passionate about this topic, I'm really passionate about my clients and making sure they get their affairs in order because the last thing anyone wants to deal with is to have a lot of red tape or a lot of aggravation in the middle of the grief that they're already going through when they lose a loved one, whether it's a parent, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a child. The more that you can have your affairs in order, the better it will be for everyone around you. It falls to the bottom of people's to-do list because we all have such busy lives. Whether you're single, whether you have a partner or a spouse, or whether you have multiple children, everyone's lives are busy in different ways. And this seems to fall to the bottom of the to-do list. And really, unless they become aware of how important it is and how crucial it is, and they've firsthand seen, a lot of times clients come to me after a parent dies and they're like, oh my gosh, this everything was left to me in such a mess and I have to deal with this issue and that issue and the other issue. And they learn from that and they're like, wait, I don't want this to happen to my children or to my spouse. And worse yet, it's obviously also very important when you have minor children. It's one thing to talk about money and leaving money to the beneficiaries you want to leave it to, and to have things follow your wishes. And it's quite another thing to leave guardianship up in the air and really leave that to the whims of the government and to the probate court and to have things not be settled in that area. So this is of utmost importance, I think, and should be at the top of the to-do list for people.
Yeah, and that's it. I always joke around like, do you want the government's plan or your family's plan? Right. And that's is why it's so key for people to take steps forward, right? Plan, you set something in motion, it's probably going to evolve and change over time, but one is at least to get started. So as part of this series, and this is why it's going to be great because there's a lot of information in this space, right? And depending on where people are, right, in their lives, there's a lot of more sophisticated things you can do, but even some just getting the basics down to get going is so key. And so Alessandra is going to help us sort of dig into the details of what an estate plan is, basic roles and the documents to kind of at least get a grounding and a foundational piece as we build on this conversation. So this is where it's going to start. So let's step back for a second because in the world of legal and certainly personal finance, there's just so much information. So let's start with the basics, right? What
Sure.
is an estate plan, right? What are some of those? How would you define it? And what are some key things that are elements of an estate plan?
Well, instead of talking like a lawyer, I'm going to talk like a regular person, human person, and be like, an estate plan is just a fancy title. Like people hear estate plan and think, oh, I have to have all this money, otherwise I don't need it. That's not true. An estate plan could be anyone. Yes, there are more intricate plans, as you mentioned, and then there are simple plans. And a simple plan could be as simple as you have a will, right? Everyone who is 18 or above, for the most part, should have a will in place. When you're a legal adult, as long as you have some sort of assets or anything in your name. And an estate plan ideally is not only having a will, it's also having your healthcare directives in place, a durable durable power of attorney in place, a living will in place, and the basic estate documents, as we call them, in place because they all protect an individual in different ways. A will dictates who gets guardianship of your children and where all your assets go when you die, right? Healthcare directives, and that encapsulates a few different documents depending upon what state you live in and what documents are needed. It could be a healthcare directive / healthcare proxy, whatever people call them, right? And that dictates who makes decisions for you in a medical arena if you can't make them yourself, right? You want to designate who's going to make a decision for you if you are ill or if you get in a car accident. Do you want it to be your spouse? Do you want it to be your parent? Do you want it to be your best friend? Do you want it to be your adult child? There are people that are better positioned to be making those decisions for you than others, and you should be the one to decide who that person steps into your shoes and makes those decisions for you if you cannot for yourself. A living will. Do you want to have a living will? Everyone doesn't have to have a living will. There are rational, important reasons to have a living will. And if you're in a terminal condition with no hope of survival, and you don't want to have extraordinary measures because you're in an incurable state, then you might want a living will instead of potentially your family having to go to court to get you off of a respirator or off a artificial feeding machine, or whatever it may be. So it's better to have those discussions because the other part is the anguish that your family has to go through in making that decision. If you've had an open discussion saying, no, I don't wish to live like that, even if there might be some miracle out there, like if I'm on the machines for like however many days or months or whatever, and there is no hope, there's no brain waves, there's no hope of survival, I want to be taken off. So you can have the person then having to make that decision can have the peace of mind that this is what you wanted, right? So that's an important thing. The other thing is a durable power of attorney. Now, a durable power of attorney only exists while you're still alive, right? Once you die, the will takes over. So that's a very important concept. So the durable power of attorney is a document which I call, in plain language, the business document. So if you can't do something for yourself because you're ill or incapacitated temporarily or permanently, right? You could be in a car accident and be in the hospital on morphine and fentanyl and not be able to take care of your business matters, not be able to file your taxes on tax day, pay your mortgage, pay your rent, get your kids the money they need to keep living their lives while you're in the hospital for a week or two or a month. You want somebody to be able to have access to your bank accounts to be able to support your children or to be able to support you and make sure that your house doesn't go in foreclosure or your rent is paid or whatever the case may be. So then once you're fine, then that person no longer has to take over for you. But at least you have someone that you could trust that can step into your shoes. So those Another thing is an authorization of medical records, which falls under the healthcare umbrella. That document I think is fabulous because it's a one-page document and it's basically a blanket HIPAA authorization. So anytime you go into the hospital or into a doctor's office, a lot of times they have you fill out all those HIPAA forms. But if you're not in the position to do that, this is a blanket HIPAA release form that your spouse could use, or your sister, or your brother, or your partner could use and say, hey, I need to get medical records from the heart surgeon to the general practitioner or vice versa. And it makes it very easy. So, as Tom, they're very strict these days. They're very strict. Once kids turn 18 years old, parents don't have access to their medical records anymore. They can't speak to the doctors anymore. The only thing they can really do is pay the bill because everyone always lets you pay the bill. So these are things that people have to keep in mind, and a lot of them don't have to do with because you have tons of wealth. Like if you're just a normal person living your normal life, these are things that you need to have in place. And then, of course, there are other things that are important depending upon what your assets are.
Yeah, and that's why. I mean, even just getting the foundational piece of, hey, it's not just about when you die, right? It's these are things that you put in place to ensure that if you can't make decisions, whether it be financially or legally or for your health, that you have the people that you entrust to make those decisions in the way that you want.
Yeah,
So, although these are very touchy subjects, and to your point, this is, that's one of my goals in life before I graduate from this earth is to help people have honest, open conversations about these things because they're real, right?
yeah,
They happen. Unfortunately, they happen at the time no one ever expects them to happen. And so the question is, you want to talk about those things or just leave it up to hope or someone else's plans? And
right.
that's why it's so key to sort of have these conversations. And it's crazy because and there was a phrase that I sort of started adopting and listening to recently. It's called memento mori. And it's sort of the philosophical thing back in the Roman times. They would say these things to each other to remind themselves they're immortal, to
Yeah,
get to life, get to living life, get to doing the things like these things, right? Like getting an estate plan so you can be prepared for what's to happen. And so that's kind of the basis of it. So from what I gather, it's obviously the will is key, right? To at least having that. And we'll
yes.
talk about that. So what is, you didn't mention, I know there's more sophisticated, but like, what's the difference between like a will and a trust? Because you hear these things oftentimes and people get I think a little confused on that.
Sure. Well, just to clarify, there's lots of different wills, right? Like there's lots of different wills and types of wills, and wills can have a lot of different provisions in them, right? And there are certain wills that have trusts embedded in the will, and that's
Mm.
called a testamentary trust. And testamentary trusts have pros and cons to them. But I think that the biggest con to having a testamentary trust is that, let's just say you have a will, right? And you don't have a separate revocable living trust, which I'll explain what that is in a few minutes. But you have trust embedded, trust language in the will that says, oh, if I should pass, my minor children can have one third of the estate at age 25 and one third at 30 and one third and the remainder at 35. Now, what people don't realize is that's all well and good, um, except for the fact at least you have that in there. But the trustee of those testamentary trusts have to report, as long as the kids are, they have to report to the probate court and put in accountings a lot of times to the probate court until those different ages are reached. And
Mm.
that costs money. There's administrative fees involved, there's government fees involved, there's probate court fees involved. So it's not an ideal situation. And it's fine if you want, like, maybe if you want everything to be paid out at age 18 or 21. But even then, if you have a minor child, and I have two of these instances right now, one in New York and one in Connecticut, where a ex-spouse passed away, and they had to name a guardian ad litem for the property of the child, and that guardian ad litem and the mother of the child has to account to the probate court for every single cent that is spent on that child that is coming from the estate of the deceased father. And it's expensive, it's a headache, it is really, you have to set up separate accounts, and it's not ideal at all. And then that could be avoided by doing what's called a pour over will, which pours over into what's called a revocable living trust. And it's really not that hard to set up, and it is so worth it, because basically what it's exactly what it sounds like. The will pours over into the trust. So you have a simpler will that basically says everything in my estate goes to my trust if I die, right? Unless by other than like maybe by tangible personal property, which maybe you want it, some things to go to some person and some to go to the other person, or you want the tangible personal property to go to the trust, but you want the trustee to manage it, not the executor. So basically it makes it a lot easier, because during your lifetime you can put assets in the name of your revocable living trust. You can retitle your assets. Doesn't take any power away from you. You manage your assets. Like, your home could be put in the revocable living trust name, and you just are the trustee. And you can still sell it. You can still do whatever what you want with it. You can still get a home equity loan. You can do whatever you want. But if you die, then the trustee can turn around and sell the house, rent the house, do what they need to do with the house without having to go through the probate court. Otherwise, you've got to get fiduciary go do a probate petition, go through the whole probate and administration, hire an attorney to do that, which is not cheap. And while it's wonderful to have that income, I do everything in my power to avoid probate and administration for my clients. Um, because it's not easy, even if you have like the best probate judges and the best courts. So it's very important to really kind of try to either leave things via beneficiary, make sure you have beneficiaries on all of your accounts, and the right beneficiaries and contingent beneficiaries, or you have revocable living things held in your revocable living trust, or the revocable living trust is the beneficiary. Now, I say that with a caveat, because everybody's situation is different and it has to be reviewed by an attorney, because there are certain assets that shouldn't be held in trust because of tax reasons. And so that's why it's also very important that people, when they're doing their estate planning, work with their financial advisor, if they have one, their CPA, accountant, and their attorney, and those three people, and a lot of times also their insurance provider, all of them work together to make sure everything flows the way it should flow. And because you want to make sure that you don't get dinged on taxes. For instance, IRAs are very tricky, and without getting into minutia, usually are kept in individual names unless there is apparent reasons to set up IRA trusts. And it's very complicated. But anyway.
No, to your point, and I appreciate that because, again, this was just to get a kind of initial sort of foundational pieces of it, and things can get complicated, and that's why you have a team of people helping you, right? Because individually, right, and this is what I've often seen it where the client is put in a position of trying to figure out all the different levels of experts and sort of
Yeah.
then come some level of conclusion. This is why you work as a team on behalf of you. So it's a really huge important point.
Yeah, and just to interject, not to interrupt Tom, another thing is that, like, I have clients that come to me who don't have financial advisors because they're like, oh, I don't have enough money to have a financial advisor, or I don't have enough to manage, and da da da. Well, you know what? Never underestimate having someone to at least review everything for you. And so many financial advisors will do that complimentary. And then you can really see, do you need a financial advisor or don't you? And it will be of no cost to you for that initial consultation or evaluation. So a lot of times I recommend that to clients, even if they think they don't have enough liquid assets or assets in general to have a financial advisor.
Absolutely, right. And at least you go see what it might look like and the cost, because just like you're describing, not setting up, and maybe some people do this, don't get their estate plan because they feel it's too costly, but imagine what the costs are potentially down the road, right?
Exactly.
And
And
you have
yeah,
to really evaluate that thinking more long term about things,
yeah,
because we can easily get caught up in sort of maybe a out of pocket cost today, but
right,
there are potentially bigger issues by not doing this, and even cost savings by
right.
getting ahead of these sorts of things like your estate plan,
Yeah,
right?
and I also think that people can be candid with their attorney and be like, listen, I don't have this upfront cost right now. Can you work with me? Can we spread it out over time? Do some form of payment plan. You'd be very surprised at how people will work with you because they care for you to
Mhm.
be protected.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit just because there's a really good sort of setting the table of kind of the core elements. Obviously, as we get through the series of this, we're going to go into more complicated, more detailed aspects of it. But what I think is also really important through my experience in thinking through this for my own family is there are vital people that play certain roles in your estate plan. It isn't just you, right? You could have, there's a lot of different things to consider. So, from your lens, Alessandra, like who are those types of roles that, for people thinking about that, they really should consider this and put some thinking time into who they identify as
Sure.
members in their estate plan?
Sure. And I help my clients work through that and we discuss the different roles and I educate them on the different roles and also sometimes talk about the different personalities in the
Mhm.
family to take on those roles, right? So, and I feel like, listen, don't let, if you don't have a deep bench or nobody's perfect for a role, listen, someone's better than nothing. So we work through discussing who potential people could be. So the most important, I mean, the most crucial roles are executor, trustee, and guardian if you have children or pets. I should throw the pets in there. So, because also there's a lot of people with pets out there that don't have children that would like somebody taking care of their pets if something happens to them. So, that was a tangent, but there you go. So, an executor is a finite job, right? The executor is the person that has to step in immediately upon your death. They are named in your will and they are to take care of your affairs once you've passed, which means where does the tangible personal property go? Who pays? Um, they pay the rest of your bills, your outstanding bills. They make sure that all the assets are going to where they should go to and what beneficiaries they should go to, whether they go directly to beneficiaries with specific distributions or whether they go into a trust and they make sure that those assets get moved to the trust and to the trustee, and then the trustee takes over from there. And the tangible personal property, everything in your home, your car, things like that, all go to who they're supposed to be going to or get sold, and the money gets put in the pot of the estate to then get distributed to the beneficiaries. And they're also the person who has to deal with the probate proceeding if you have to go through probate. So they do the probate and administration proceeding with the attorney, with the court, and get everything tied up before they can then release all of the assets. So that's the executor. The trustee's job could be, and usually is, a longer job because it depends upon what type of trust you have and how long the trust carries on, right? Do you have a trust that is to release and be totally distributed at age 25 of your kids, or do you have a trust that never gets distributed until the money runs out. Like, do they keep it in trust, or does it get distributed at different ages? So the trustee's job is to manage, invest the money, do what the trust says the trustee is supposed to do with the money to take care of the people that the trust is supposed to take care of. That's the simplest way I can put it, right? And then the guardians, I think we all know, is who takes over. God forbid something should happen to you and you have children, minor children that need to be taken care of. Now, if you are the last to die of your spouse, that's an issue. Obviously, you're the guardian. If your spouse dies, you're still the guardian of your own children. But if you should die, or the two spouses should die in a common accident, who is taking over as guardian? And I often, in all of these roles, recommend a substitute person also, in case that person gets ill or should predecease you. And the guardianship is really important, and for obvious reasons. And that's the one that I feel is the stickiest of all of the roles, because nobody wants to think about somebody else raising their children. But, it's a very important role. And what's important is that people have to remember that this is not something that can't be changed. So if you name your parents and your parents are getting up there in age to take care of your children, their grandchildren, well, you could have the substitute be some siblings, or a very dear friend that is willing to serve in that role. Then, with regards to the healthcare proxy, as I mentioned before, they call it the agent, right? The healthcare agent. So the person who steps in for you after you can't make decisions for yourself is called the healthcare agent. And then they step into your shoes and make decisions for you. The durable power of attorney, it's called also an agent, right? So sometimes it's also called an attorney in fact, which really confuses people, because they're like, I'm getting named and they're referring to me as an attorney in fact, and I am not an attorney. But there's legalese for you. So the person who steps in for you, if you can't take care of your business matters, is called the agent for the power of attorney, or the attorney in fact. And for people who don't have a lot of close family, or in a lot of times I have clients who all their family is overseas. They're international people and all their family is overseas, or lives in other countries. In some of these roles, you could designate a professional, whether it's a corporate trustee, if you need that type, if you have that type of wealth and you want to name a corporate trustee. It could be it could be an attorney who does trustee services. So it just really matters. Or it could be a personal friend that happens to be an attorney or a professional in some way that can step into these roles.
No, that's great. Yeah, you beat me to the punch, because that's what, for some folks, maybe they don't have anyone they could trust in those roles, right? There are professionals that can fill in that role for you. And I guess there are some benefits with that they're hopefully going to be around regardless, right? Those entities that maybe as you look at your plan, that things will change as family members change, your relationships with
Yeah.
them change. It's always flexible, but having a professional or an organization do it, whether it's a
Yeah.
bank or attorney or a group, they're going to potentially be around. So you have options, right?
Yeah, and
So,
that I always tell my clients, tell them that could be like the third person in line or the fourth person in line, right? Like, just have a fallback in case all those other people are not available. And it's important to kind of look at where the succession is. And again, with a will, a revocable living trust, a durable power of attorney, a healthcare proxy, all of those things can be amended and changed and replaced. It gets a little harder when you're talking about irrevocable trusts, because it's not that they are irrevocable, but in most cases, there's language in there to change the trustees and a certain way to change the trustees. Like, maybe two people have to agree, or the last trustee is able to assign the next trustee if they're the last one in line. And I do that all the time So that's another reason why I also recommend to my clients to kind of, once you do get your estate plan all in place, anytime there's a major life transition or every 3 to 5 years, to really relook at your documents, and then if you think you need to, have an attorney give a review, and just a review because of maybe any different changes in the law, to see if you need to change anything.
Yeah, no, that's really huge. That's the type of thing that regardless of where you start, right? The plan is subject to change, right? And evolve. And this is why you meet with professionals like Alessandra to help you think through those things and sort of revisit them on occasion
Yeah,
because life changes, priorities change. That's part of the plan, right? It's not set in
yeah.
stone. And this is why you get the expert help like this. So we covered quite a bit of ground here. We talked around the different sort of documents, elements of an estate plan, the people who are involved with it, right? Anything that you want to share as a kind of foundational piece to kind of wrap up this kind of first introductory session around estate planning?
I think one other thing I want to stress to people is also don't underestimate when you have elderly parents, to make sure that they have their estate in order, like without, which is sometimes a touchy situation, right? But you don't need to know what exactly their assets are if they don't want to share them with you, and maybe they have very modest assets, and or maybe they're very wealthy, but just to have those discussions with the elder generation so that you're not stuck with a mess. If they should get ill and they are unable to make decisions for themselves, and then it's too late for them
Mhm.
to execute documents because they have dementia or Alzheimer's, or they are too ill to do anything. That is a situation that I wanted to kind of put into this introductory discussion also, because a lot of times we're thinking about maybe our immediate family and the generation below us, but you really have to think about your parents also, if you're lucky enough to still have parents who are alive.
Yeah, and it still sometimes shocks me to when speak to people about it, and they have elderly parents, and they said, I don't even know what they have,
Yeah,
right? And so they don't even know how to prepare. And you listen to that, and I understand those things happen, and that's why, again, that's
yeah,
why we're trying to encourage people to talk about these things,
yeah,
right? Because we want it the best. It's not all about the wealth and the dollars. There's a component of that, but it's
sure.
even just to get aligned on what's to come and make it easier for these sorts of transitions. So,
Yeah.
Alessandra, I really appreciate all you've shared. There's a ton of information. I would encourage everyone to listen again. We're going to be going through a series of these in much more depth and different topics related to the documents themselves and what to consider, tax, whatever. We're going to go through the details of it. So, but hopefully this gives you a good starting point to understand the importance of it, right? And it can be simple to start. Just like
Yeah.
Alessandra said, you can get started with something and evolve and build it, but you got to get started somewhere. I'd
Yes.
rather be 10 years early than one day late because
Yep.
things can change very dramatically and impact things for the worse. So, Alessandra, thank you so much. I really always appreciate your insights and wisdom around this. And we'll be going through a series of these and look forward to hearing from you again. So, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome, Tom. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for letting me share all this great information with your viewers. And I really look forward to talking more in depth on the other topics that we have planned.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Okay, have a great day.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.
Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help help you get more educated around your finances so you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.